Have you felt like you've been stretched too thin? Like the demands of many of those people in your life expect so much from you and always are taking a little bit more? We often encounter moments that push us beyond our comfort zone. Somebody asks for your help to solve a problem that benefits them, and you agree. But you also agree because you feel obligated. You feel like you're supposed to. You don't want to turn this person down. You don't want to make a scene. You want to be the great guy. You want to be the buddy. I recently learned about an internal tool that is guiding our choices. However, this can be difficult to read, to understand what this tool is telling you, as they're crucial to the future of the relationships you have with others and yourself. Welcome back. My name is Blake, and I guide those on a spiritual journey to answer the questions they didn't even know they had. Today, we're going to touch on something that is at the forefront of all interactions. It's a topic that's applicable to any kind of relationship, personal relationships, our work relationships, and even our love relationships demand a lot from us. What I'm talking about is the art of creating boundaries. So the idea of boundaries kind of brings up this idea of like keeping people out and keeping people away, but I really want to challenge this for you. I really want us to think more about when the idea of boundaries comes up, it should bring up more of an idea of drawing a line in the sand. But not just one person drawing a line in the sand, it's the role that we're going to play, but more or less two people drawing lines in the sand and agreeing where that line is. Something that parties can mutually do to indicate where they expect to be met and respected. So I recently watched a TED Talk on boundaries. It was pretty awesome. The concept that I learned from that video was about how we have this tiny compass within us that is directing us. It's a very simple mechanic. It's simply yes and no. It just tells us to make those choices that make sense for us in the situation. And what you find over time, certain things will cloud that compass, making it really hard to get a good read on what you want to do and where your boundaries are in a specific situation. Imagine having to navigate through a really thick fog. I mean, you know where you want to go, you just don't know the true direction on how to get there. This cloudiness comes from an emotional response. Stress, anxiety, past events, even a desire to please others. All of these things play a role. One other thing that clouds people's compasses is not hitting the subscribe button and liking the video. The cloudiness of your compass can be a huge roadblock in determining and really nailing down where your boundaries are important and when to enforce those with people that come into your life. But why is this so difficult? You know, you would think about a boundary as being like, I don't like that. I do like that. And while this is pretty accurate, I think, for a lot of people, there's a subtext of choices that have to be made in certain situations where maybe people don't feel empowered, like they come from a job, or maybe they're in a relationship that they're not really feeling that secure about. There's a point where there is some sort of authoritative role that they feel like they have to surrender to and agree to, despite how they feel about things, even though they know deep down inside that they really do have an opinion on things. They don't really feel empowered to communicate this out of fear of how it'll be perceived or how it could be negatively affecting to the performance of their job and their lifestyle. What complicates it for a lot of people is the fact that setting the boundaries is a very logical expression. It's very much yes, no. However, the emotions that come from setting those boundaries is not that logical. At its very core, boundaries are communicating where your higher self is and your expectation of where to be met at that version of your higher self. When we actually begin to embody our authentic self and become more familiar with these values and this identity of the true being that we want to be, a lot of these boundary issues become a lot clearer. It becomes like it makes a lot more sense. You know where you stand on a lot more things, and you can confidently negotiate those things to other people without really being worried about any of the emotional ramifications that could come from somebody misunderstanding or disagreeing with where your boundaries currently are. It's about having a deep understanding of ourselves, really knowing where our comfort zones are, and being able to draw a line in the sand to protect our peace and our tranquility. This process of connecting more to our authentic self and communicating that really helps aid in this process of having healthier relationships that really matter and connect with more people. But what's more important is that it also kind of reaches out and it draws in these other people who are also connecting to their higher self and defending certain boundaries and expectations that they have. That is going to be the agreement between these two beings, including yourself, where you actually start having more genuine relationships that match the energy that you are trying to develop and present to the world. And again, a lot of this doesn't come in overnight. You got to spend quite a bit of time reflecting over yourself, a lot of journaling, and a lot of asking questions to be more comfortable with where is your higher self? What things are you comfortable with? And how do you know for sure to communicate with that other people to set those expectations appropriately? As we're trying to define and declare where these boundaries are and the appropriate time with people in our lives, we'll find that there is this inner child that is constantly running across these boundaries. The inner child is experiencing this hurt or this violation that they had when a long time ago, and they're still acting upon that by saying, fuck your boundary, I don't want to be here anymore. And it creates a lot of tension for sticking to and being able to move forward. This kind of behavior is a lot of that clouding that you're going to get over your compass. This simple yes or no indicator is going to be really hard to be able to communicate because either your inner child is afraid to stay in that moment, or maybe they're even seeking the need of approval from other people. A lot of what needs to be done with this inner child is just inner child work. This ability to go back through and feel those emotions that we still have trapped. You don't have to actually go back and find out this horrible experience and unpack all these mysteries. Sometimes this stuff is just insequential from in our youth, being in moments where we were scared and vulnerable, and we didn't have the ability to leverage a lot of the knowledge that we know as adults now over our emotions in that moment then to be able to navigate them in the most healthy ways. We're going to find countless moments in our lives where we don't always get to choose the people that we spend a lot of time with, especially in a professional setting. And while it's important to set up boundaries, it's also important to look for certain people that may be more beneficial at supporting you for setting up those boundaries than others. For instance, you may have a certain coworker that you just don't work with the best. But if you were a little bit more vocal about this and approached it in a certain way, you may be able to find a compromise to do work in a certain way that doesn't actually engage that person. Or even maybe try to echo to that person a little bit more effectively where you actually have your expectations to see if they can meet you there. I know this can be a little difficult in situations where we talk about places that you don't really get to make your own friends, like when you're at work and you don't really get to choose the encounters you're at. You may have to kind of compromise with whatever you have. This isn't really a reason why you shouldn't enforce your boundaries up front. You want to be as early as you can in emphasizing where your boundaries are so that people don't over time think that you can kind of take things a certain way from you. One of the big things that I think people can do when they recognize that maybe they have a hard time putting up boundaries and they start doing this work for the first time is that they'll overload on boundaries and they'll start putting up walls. And they'll find that they actually don't get the same support they did because they've actually pushed a lot of people away. Nobody's able to actually come back to them because their walls are so high. And this has a lot of disadvantages. It can be very lonely at this point where you basically realize you were saying yes to too many things and now you started learning the power of no and you're saying no to everything. But you can only do that for so long before you realize that the new problem you have with boundaries is the exact opposite. Instead of setting them, you've set too many, or you've not really detailed the specifics of what you want the boundary to be. So maybe it's a little bit easier when we're not talking about the professional world, but at least in your personal life, where you have more of a choice of the people that you can stick with in your life and the variety of people that you can welcome into your life. You want to pay very special attention to those that really want to recognize where your line in the sand is, where your boundaries are. They want to meet you there and they want to make sure that they have it right. They also respond really well to setting boundaries of their own to you up front. As you get more and more familiar with this, you're going to be able to notice whenever somebody has a boundary that's being put in front of you, and you're going to have no issue honoring it because you understand the language that they're speaking with you. It's also important to be very wary of any boundary violations that you experience and recognizing how I could actually identify this and present it to people in new relationships that I'm having very early on. Because if people know and know where your expectations are very early on, there is no reason to ever feel this negative emotion when later in that relationship you have to kind of speak back up and remind them where you're at. People are going to make a lot more sense to that. They're going to be a lot more clear, and they're going to be a lot more supportive on exactly where your line in the sand is, and definitely want to meet you halfway. And you made it this far. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. I will see you in the next video.